Hello students, welcome to the EPG Pathshala. I am Renu Arora, former Head Education and Training Division, CSIR, NISCARE, New Delhi. Today I am going to talk about the module Operations Research. This is from the paper Management of Libraries and Information Centers. The objectives of this module are: firstly, to describe the purpose, role, and operations research in an information organization. Secondly, to understand the characteristics of operations research. Thirdly, to get an insight into the OR development process. Besides this, we will also explain the advantages and disadvantages of operations research. And lastly, we'll try to establish the role of operations research in libraries and information organizations. Let's now first define what is an operation. An operation is a pattern of activities of men and machines which are engaged in carrying out a cooperative and usually repetitive task. This is with the purpose of preset goals and according to specified rules of operation. The scientific study of all the operations of an organization is called operations research. In operations research, we basically apply mathematical applications. That is, when in a particular situation we apply mathematical solution to the problems, it's referred to as operations research. What is operations research? We can identify operations research with the help of two terms. Firstly, operations. Operations are the activities carried out in an organization. Research is the process of observation and testing characterized by the scientific method, situation, problem statement, model construction, validation, experimentation, candid solutions, etc. are some of the aspects related to research. In fact, when we construct a model, it is an abstract representation of reality. Mathematical, physical, narrative set of rules in computer programs are referred to as models. Operations research looks at an organization's operations and the functions it exists to perform. The objective of operations research is to work with users to find practical and pragmatic solutions to operational or strategic problems. Let's now try to learn what OR is all about in information organizations. OR is the discipline of applying advanced analytical methods to help make better decisions. By using the various techniques such as mathematical modeling to analyze complex situations, the operations research gives the managers the power to make more effective decisions and build more productive systems which are based on four factors. Firstly, more complete data. Secondly, consideration of all available options. Fourthly, careful predictions of outcomes and estimates of risk. And fourthly, the latest decision tools and techniques. In other words, we can define OR as the application of mathematical techniques, models, and tools to a problem within a system to yield the optimal situation. OR or operations research is therefore the field of how to form mathematical models of complex management decision problems, and secondly, how to analyze the models to gain insight about possible situations. History of operations research. OR started just before World War II in Britain with the establishment of a team of scientists to study the strategic and tactical problems involved in military operations. The objective was to find the most effective utilization of limited military resources by the use of quantitative techniques. It was adopted by the industry after the World War II. The initial application of operations research to industry were extensions of these applied to the military, and the result in the private sector was mixed. The objective was to find out the most effective utilization of resources. So, there were, however, enough success to draw attention to the field. By the mid 1950s, OR had received considerable publicity, and it soon became a familiar phrase in the vocabulary of management. During the 1960s, operations research was introduced in universities as part of course on industrial engineering or management. It was found that in many respects OR was similar to scientific management, which had earlier been pioneered by Frederick Taylor, Frank and Lillian Gilbreth, and many other management experts. Management schools too followed suit and incorporated operations research into their curriculum. After the 1990s, OR has grown to a large extent due to wide use of computers in organizations, as it has become very easy to prepare mathematical models with the help of computers. Manufacturers used OR to make products more efficiently, schedule equipment maintenance, and control inventory and distribution. And success in these areas led to expansion into strategic and financial planning and into such diverse areas as criminal justice, education, meteorology, and communications. Characteristics of operations research. In the context of libraries and information organizations, characteristics of operations research are addresses specific problems within specific programs. In fact, in libraries, there are some problems which are specific only to the libraries, so therefore, these can be solved by applying some specific programs to solve the problems. Deals with problems that are under control of library professionals. OR has been effectively and efficiently used within the library setup because the problems which are very specific to library situation and can be dealt with library professionals are possible to be solved. Lastly, it uses systematic procedures for data collection and evidence data generation. Again, this is an aspect which can be applied to libraries. Basically, libraries have been involved in collecting data and information for their users. So, this particular characteristic of OR is very typical of library situation. So, therefore, this can be easily applied to library situations. Now we will try to know why the libraries in the modern times need operations research at all. This is due to several factors. First one, it is basically due to the rising costs, shrinking budgets, and available technologies. The modern libraries want to make the best use of available resources. The very fact that the materials and equipment etc. in the libraries is becoming more and more costly over the years, and our budgets more or less are remaining almost the same. So in order to have more value for existing budgets or existing monies, we need to have better use of our available resources. So libraries do require operations research. Secondly, the modern computer and communication technologies have increased the need for information requirements, and the present day library users expect high quality library products and services whenever and wherever they need them. It is due to the fact that the modern users are more equipped, know more about modern technologies, they know more about availability of information sources and resources. And also the modern technologies have made it possible for the library users to have access to the information from the libraries. So therefore the library staff has to ensure that all the library products and services, wherever and whenever the users need, are made available to them. And thirdly, the library organizations, whether these are public or private or government organizations, they need to provide all these products and services as effectively and efficiently as possible. The very fact that plenty of resources and finances are required to make available the different services, products, etc. So, operations research, with the help of mathematical modeling, provides the best possible solution to help our modern day library users. So, all the government, public, or private library organizations, they can apply OR in their various techniques, activities, etc., so that better services are made available to our present day users. OR in libraries and information organizations. Let us now take a look at how OR is applicable in library information organizations. The application of operations research methods in libraries started in the early 1960s. Phillips M. Morse at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, referred to as the famous MIT, was first one to develop interest in libraries. He used the library of MIT as a convenient laboratory for student projects in the operations research program. Then the National Science Foundation was one of the first foundations that supported much of the early work in the United States and was the major factor in influencing operations research to address the problems of libraries. The early efforts focused on traditional areas of library operations, particularly those that require a minimum understanding of library science. The work at Purdue University began in 1962 with an internally funded operations research study of the university's libraries. The work done by the Lakemere Group at Purdue was probably the most significant, both in terms of impact, size, and duration. The Industrial Engineering School at Purdue had a good working relationship with the Purdue University libraries. The activities at Purdue continued to expand in the late 1960s, eventually touching on almost all aspects of library operations. The scope of the research activity ranged from course projects to doctoral dissertations. Lakemere identified a dozen OR theses completed at Purdue by 1971, which related to libraries. Activities at other institutions followed the general pattern observed at Purdue. Starting in the early 1960s, there was a full decade of library activity. By the end of the period, most aspects of library operations had been investigated. The study of library operations research started changing in the early 1970s. By 1975, most of the research activity had shifted from operations research units to libraries or library schools. Most of the library schools started including operations research in their curriculum. As librarians and information scientists started applying OR methodology, it became more difficult to distinguish operations research studies from other quantitative library research. By the mid 1970s, bibliometrics became an accepted term to describe quantitative research on libraries. Much of the research which would have been otherwise called operations research in the 1960s was called bibliometrics by the late 1970s. Bibliometrics, however, did not replace the library operations research, and the trend to apply operations research in libraries has been continuing since then. OR solutions. Some of the OR solution techniques include linear programming, non-linear programming, thirdly, dynamic programming, integer programming, network analysis, queuing theory or queuing models, probability theory, decision processes, multiple criteria decision making, general simulation. In fact, most of these usually are not very much applicable in the library science field. But however, network analysis in the form of PERT CPM has been effectively applied in library activities or preparing or scheduling the library projects. In many cases, linear programming and multiple criteria decision making and decision processes have also been applied in library and information organizations. OR applications. In fact, we can see the OR applications in several fields. Some of these fields include business. Mostly, almost all the businesses, they can have the OR applications. Then government and non-profit making organizations. Thirdly, healthcare. In healthcare, we find that OR can be very effectively and efficiently applied. Even in the military sector, OR is very much applicable. But the best OR application can be seen in the planning sector. In fact, for planning any activities, the OR application helps quite a lot. Similarly, in strategic decision making, OR is very much applicable. And it can be seen that in majority of the organizations, including the information organizations, the application of OR can be seen in decision making, planning, and policy making. Then, in the production sector, OR is very helpful. Besides this, distribution, logistics, transportation also has the OR applications. Then, one of the major areas where OR is very much applicable is the supply chain management. Besides this, in marketing, it has been seen that OR is quite effective in the marketing sector as well. Lastly, in the financial sector, OR applications can be seen to a large extent. Now we will know what are the components of an OR model. As we have already discussed, OR models are required to be constructed in order to apply OR to any library situations. So, the main components of any OR model are firstly the alternatives available, secondly, the objectives or criteria, and thirdly, the constraints. Let me now explain each of the components in detail. Firstly, the alternatives. We have to see what are the alternative situations available and what are the possible solutions to a particular problem. So, in this way, all the alternatives are examined and accordingly a mathematical model is prepared. Also, when we talk about alternatives, we take a look at the available equipment, available finances, and available possible solutions. So, accordingly, the alternative is selected. In fact, what majority of the organizations do is that they have available three or four alternatives to a particular problem, and they do rank the particular alternatives, and the first possible alternative is first selected. If that is not feasible, the next one and subsequently the other alternatives are selected. Secondly, the objectives or the criteria. In this particular component of an OR model, all the objectives of the possible solution or the problem are analyzed. These objectives are listed, and it is seen that how these objectives can be achieved by preparing the particular module. And while preparing the objectives, the particular situation, the available resources are to be kept into consideration. And lastly, the last component, that is the constraints. When the models are constructed, all the possible constraints which we are likely to face in the future are taken into considerations. These constraints could be with regard to available equipment, available resources, available finances, or even available manpower. And in view of the lesser constraints, the particular alternative can be selected. In fact, the constraints basically, when they are taken into consideration before the model is actually applied, help a lot in finding the possible solution to a particular problem. OR process. After knowing about OR, let's now take a look at the operations research process. In fact, there are some 7 or 8 steps to the OR process. It starts with formulating the problem. Then second step is constructing a mathematical model to represent the system under study. Thirdly, deriving a solution from the model. Fourthly, testing the model and the solution derived from it. Next is establishing controls over the situation. After the situation is under control, putting the solution to work, which is referred to as implementation. And the last step in the OR process is the feedback. Let's know some details of the OR process. Although these steps of OR vary in complexity from problem to problem, in some applications the formulation may be very difficult. In others, however, the model construction may be the most complex step. The phases of the OR are now being described. When we say formulating the problem, it is one of the most difficult steps for library operations. This step requires that the objective be stated in measurable terms, defining the system and identifying any constraints. While operations research and the researchers in operations research can assist, formulating the problem is primarily the responsibility of the library staff or the chief librarian. In the next step, construction of the mathematical model and the derivation of its solution, these are the areas in which the OR researcher can contribute the maximum. The knowledge of operations research is vital in these steps. A variety of general models such as inventory, queuing, linear programming, simulation, networking, and scheduling have been used extensively. An extensive literature covering both theory and practice exists on these models. The model construction and solution should be performed by an expert operations research practitioner for most of the models. The simple models can be constructed by the library staff or the librarian in case he or she has some training or experience in OR. The next step requires testing the model and its solution. This requires close cooperation between the librarian and the OR practitioners. A model is usually never more than a representation of the reality. A good model is one that can accurately predict the essential aspects of the system. The best method of testing the model is the librarian's intuition, as it is usually based on experience and thus can be valuable. Otherwise, there are a variety of technical methods for testing. If the results do not appear to be right, these should be carefully examined before acceptance. After the controls over the solution need to be established, any solution is valid only as long as there are no significant changes. When conditions change, the solution must be re-evaluated. For example, in a college library, if the price of certain course books not demanded by most students is very high, then buying multiple copies may no longer be the best strategy. In the step implementation of the results, we can say that it is one of the final steps of the process before feedback. If major changes are required, then this is the step where it can be applied. Therefore, this is considered to be rather a difficult step and one that may be met with some resistance. It is important that everyone involved in the project, including the librarian, the library staff, the OR researchers, and the management of the library, should participate in the implementation of this step. The steps we have just discussed are seldom changed and have to be followed in the order as presented. Furthermore, these steps may take place simultaneously. In many projects, for example, the formulation of the steps or the problem that has been talked about in the steps is not completed until the project itself is virtually completed. There is usually a continuous interplay between these steps during the research process while it is going on. Once the OR model is prepared, the next step is to take a look at the phases of an OR process. We also refer to it as the steps in the OR process. Basically, we can see that it is a cyclic process. We always start with the possible definition of the problem, because when we look for a particular solution, the first and the foremost aspects that is to be taken into consideration is to know what the problem is all about. Depending on a particular problem, we have to try to construct the model. Next stage is here the construction of the model. When we are constructing the model, we have to take into view, as we have already discussed, the alternatives, the objectives, and the possible constraints. And when the model is constructed, the third step is solution of the model. In the particular solution, we try to find whether a particular solution will solve our problem or not. Also, the various alternatives that are available, which will be the best particular alternative, which particular solution will be the best possible solution to the particular model. Then the fourth step will be validation of the model. In this particular stage, the model which has been constructed, for which we have already sought a particular solution, we try to validate the model. And after that comes the last stage, that is implementation and feedback. In fact, implementation and feedback are two smaller steps in the whole OR process. In implementation, the model is actually applied, and we have to view it for a certain period of time to see whether it's operational or not, whether it is able to help us find our possible solutions or not, whether the model, what we had thought about for our particular problem, is feasible or not. So for the implementation stage, certain period of time has to be allotted. And once the model is implemented, then comes the feedback stage. In many OR processes, feedback is also a separate step, but implementation and feedback should go side by side, because while we are implementing, we have to see what is the feedback of our users, our staff, and what feedback we get from the resources which we have used for construction or implementation of the model. And once the feedback is received, based on that, we can decide whether to continue with the same process for the same model, or if not, then we have to again go back to the beginning stage. That is, it's a kind of a cyclic process. We again start with definition of the problem, construction, solution of the model, then validation of the model, and lastly implementation and feedback. So this is basically an cyclic process which goes on all the time. In the present day, library and information organizations have been significantly affected by operations research. OR has been successfully applied to those library activities that can be quantified. Modernization of information organizations requires conducting thorough study of existing resources and facilities, which is a costly commitment. Besides this, there are several management problems requiring proper decision-making process. For all such activities, operations research has been found to be the most possible controlling and feedback mechanism. Let's take an example of some typical problems of library organizations and examine them in the context of operations research. Some such problems in library organizations are collection building, online database searching, assisting users in finding information. And in addition to the above three examples, there are some other practical problems and areas of investigation in library and information organizations. These problems are related to inventory, allocation, queuing, sequencing, routing, replacement, and search of resources, services, procedures, and personnel of libraries. Few areas where operations research may play an important part are long-term planning, manpower and career planning, resource allocation, variable loans policy, modernization of library activities, weeding policy, marketing of information products and services, resource sharing and networking, and investment on new facilities. By constructing appropriate mathematical models, the problems just enlisted in libraries can be solved. By using techniques like mathematical modeling to analyze such library situations, operations research gives library professionals the power to make more effective decisions. OR is therefore a uniquely powerful approach to planning and decision making in library and information organizations. Let's take a look at some of the benefits of operations research. The information specialist, if operations research is applied in a library, is able to evaluate the various available routes for preparing the particular products, especially the most feasible and practical ones. Secondly, we can try to derive the maximum output with the minimum possible input. Operations research is very beneficial to the information organizations for deciding what information product services are to be offered. Secondly, what are the aspects which can be quantified and how much quantities are required. Thirdly, what are the methods which can be employed to prepare activities. Fourthly, which employees can be engaged in the preparation processes. And lastly, the marketing activities required for the products and services which have been produced by the information organizations. Operation research is therefore based upon collected information, knowledge, and advanced study of various factors impacting a particular operation. This leads to more informed decision making. It also helps to fine-tune control of operations because the use of quantifiable means easily reveal the strengths and weaknesses of the information organization. This ensures more and better control over various operations, thereby helping the library in charge to manage the library more effectively. When we say cost reduction, it is because as better decisions and increased control over library operations can reduce organizational costs. However, operations research can help reduce costs in other ways also. And besides this, team unification. Because operations research takes an intelligent and quantifiable look at the internal operations of the organization, there is a strong foundation for making unified decisions regarding operations. Besides having several advantages, operations research also has a few disadvantages. The limitations of the operations research are more related to the problems of model building, time, and money factors. Some of these are basically the main limitation of operations research is that it often ignores the human element in the production process. Besides this, this approach is technology driven and does not take into account the emotional factors and absenteeism of the employees. The main limitation of operations research is that the human element is not taken into consideration. So there is a wide gap between the managers and the operations researchers. Some more limitations of operations research are it involves a lot of time and cost. Operations research is very costly An organization needs to invest a lot of time and effort into OR in order to make it effective. So when we take a look at the budgets of the library, and we can see that there are not enough finances which enable the library staff or the librarians to apply OR into each and every activity. Secondly, analysis of only quantifiable factors. OR can evaluate only the effects of numeric or quantifiable factors. It does not consider the complexities involved with humans and their behavior. This can be seen from several examples. For example, it is disconnected from the real conditions. The results of OR are often academic in nature. Their application and integration in real life situations may not be feasible and practical. Besides this, over-dependence on computers is another drawback of operations research. Operations research depends heavily on systems and computing techniques. It does not take into account the intangible elements involved in running a library. Now, for example, OR may compute the optimum solution for library automation. However, there is an important problem related to computer systems, and the library does not get its supplies on time. This disturbs the process of library automation. But OR does not allow room for these kinds of problems. Besides that, because only the quantifiable factors can be analyzed, OR is not very much applicable in most of the library situations because the human beings are not taken into consideration. Not only the human beings, their behavior also has to be taken into consideration. This is due to the fact that libraries are basically service organizations and also not for profit making organizations. So, therefore, most of the aspects involve the human element or intervention of human beings in various services and activities. So, therefore, some of these drawbacks lead to the very fact that OR is not very much applicable in library situation. What should we know about operations research so that we can make it successful in our library situation? Firstly, we must know the components of the decision making process. In the libraries, like other organizations, there are three levels of management, which are very much visible in other organizations, but in libraries, not so much visible in majority of the cases. For example, we have the top, middle, and the lower management very visible in most of the organizations. But in library situation, we usually see the top level or the lower level. So, components of decision making process have to be identified so that we can reach proper results. Secondly, the operations research terminology. Before we apply mathematical modeling or we apply OR in library situations, it is vital that each and every staff member of the library is acquainted with the operations research terminology, not only terminology, but the manner in which OR can be efficiently applied. Thirdly, we should know what a model is and how to assess its value because everything is dependent on mathematical modeling. So, people have to be explained how models are to be prepared, how models are to be applied, and how we can assess their values so that efficiency can be brought into various processes and procedures. And lastly, how to go from a conceptual problem to a quantitative solution. In libraries, we have to face a lot of problem with regard to this particular aspect because most of the aspects although can be quantified, but there are many situations which cannot be quantified, and it is only the qualitative approach that has to be taken into consideration. So it is in this particular aspect that we face problem because many times when the human element is involved, quantification becomes not very possible. For example, we can always show how many books have been issued in a particular month from a particular library. But how many have actually been utilized or how many users have benefited from these books is something which we cannot bring forward, we cannot show. So, therefore, the quantification of each and every problem is not possible. Therefore, all the aspects of OR have to be made very clear to the library professionals so that we can effectively and efficiently apply it in library situations. So, we have seen that what OR is all about. We have also learned the OR process. We have seen how OR can be applied to libraries and information organizations. Besides this, we have also known about the benefits and drawbacks of OR in libraries and information organizations. And lastly, let's conclude. After studying this module, we can say that firstly, we can describe the need, purpose, and role of operations research in an information organization. We can also understand characteristics of OR in libraries and information organizations. We have got an insight into the OR development process. One can explain the steps of the OR process, which are basically a cyclic process. Then you can also explain the advantages and disadvantages of OR. And lastly, we have learned that how we can establish role of operations research in libraries and information organizations. The other details of the module are given in the e-text of the course material. Also given are the web references and other references along with several examples. Thank you.